Okay, so we are officially recording, and this is our first inaugural virtual panel of the CAR-PGA, and probably our first virtual panel of this scope. David and I have talked obviously before, but this is our first opportunity to get everyone together. I am your host and chair, Mike Truska. We had a discussion previously about doing more of this content. Certainly, there have been emails sent around to give us more context, but we will go over all of that. And very excited to be here and have my guest, Hawke, who is a member.
Hello.
Hawke, how long have you been a member of CAR-PGA?
Years and years. I 10 or more.
Wow. So
I'd have to look back.
I'm like a newbie compared to you. So
I think 2004. I think when I launched RPG Research was the same time I went out and tried to find all available research materials on, I'd been involved with the research for a long time, but really heavy duty web search in 2004 and then aggregate that on the web. And I think that's when I came across CAR-PGA. It was 2004.
That's awesome.
And so I probably signed up then or close to that time.
So part of it, obviously we've evolved quite a bit over time, and a lot of the discussion today is to talk about transitions, right? That's sort of what I would talk about, this being a new piece for us, but a transition. I mean, Hawke, you're talking about sort of finding it, and you're definitely one of our touchstones of the history of CAR-PGA and the future of CAR-PGA. So I think there's a huge opportunity here to really get into what we've done, bringing it forward to this point, and what we hope to achieve, at least in the short term. So very excited for you to be here. But
Thank you.
A few housekeeping things. David is with us. He is a board member. You can wave, David. David is the man responsible for the newsletter, a very important role. And
you might want to consider also the option of a podcast release. So encouraging people to speak as well, as assuming. So, for example, you may have people who are visually impaired,
yes,
who might want to hear about this and such. So I would encourage people to do, and then both visual and auditory, because role-playing gamers are quite diverse. So that's just something to consider.
It's an excellent point. And I think one of the things that we haven't talked in too much detail is really just to branch out in multimedia. If we have our own channels, podcasting, Yammer, my wife's a podcaster, so there's lots of opportunity. It's just a question of making sure we have the right tools to do that. So I think you can definitely help point us in the right direction.
Yes, yeah, we can help you with that.
It's almost like you're an expert on this stuff.
I'm not a has-been leak under pressure.
I'll just throw you random curveball questions. No, it's fine. So that's a sort of a general CAR-PGA update, just to say that we did meet. This was an outcome. This actual virtual panel was an outcome of my conversation with the board, and I thought it was a good one. We want to do more of them, not less. And as Hawke was saying, like once you have content, you can do anything with it, right? We can make it a podcast. I think there's lots of opportunity, hopefully even transcription potentially, so that it's searchable and visual and capable to anybody of no matter what means they consume the information. So I'm excited about that. The other thing that is new is the annual report. So I put together an official formal annual report. We wanted to send that around. It has a few things that we will talk about with Hawke, but some of it is just to look back at our goals. So real quickly, I decided to hold ourselves accountable and sort of how we've been doing. And those goals are at least 4. You can, depending on how you want to slice and dice them, but broadening our mission is a big piece. We did update our bylaws last year, and we also added a best practices section on diversity and inclusion, which was very important, I think, with a lot of social justice movements going on today. Something that we knew was important. And of course, there was lots of opportunity to capture that by lots of game organizations and conventions. I will be curious to see when we look back in a year how that holds up and how they've achieved those. But certainly some of them are preserved now, so that the other organizations who want to have D&I statements or talk about inclusivity or in best practices around it can leverage that. So I was excited about that. Engaging a membership, this is obviously an example, but this is new. We also added a Gamers in Need page. It's a sad fact that we have several gamers that are of fairly storied and successful who still have challenges because of just the nature of some of the issues of be it healthcare or the payments, or depending on where you live in the world. So we do link to that. So again, that happened because we've had members CAR-PGA members who have needed help, but anybody, any gamer in need, I think there's value in that. So we have that page. We did relaunch the site. Hawke and I were making a joke about WordPress, but it is at least up, and that's thanks to Alan Thomas. So really appreciate all that work, because we would not have anything. And of course, our ultimate goal is to make sure we link it to Hawke's efforts around Paul Cardwell's content, which we'll talk about. And then social media, engage the public. So we do have, we launched a Facebook page. We had a LinkedIn group, so that's more formally connected. We have a Google group. We've just started to talk about the value of potentially a YouTube channel and a podcast channel, which I think is huge. So I think all told, we are doing better than we were. It is certainly not enough for me. I'm kind of a pain in the butt, so that's not surprising. But I will say that for me, the number one piece is really increasing our membership. So I did a blitz with people I know. I would encourage all of you watching this or listening to this to do the same. We have a join us link on our page, which is one of the things I was complaining about to Hawke, but we have it. It does work now, and it is something we want to do more. So we're hoping that this kind of outreach will only grow. The attendance will also grow, and we will give our members an opportunity to hopefully engage the broader population. And that's not just gamers, that's also institutions, educational institutions. David, that's a discussion we had, which was, we know there are game studies out there that we want to make sure we're a part of and let them know we exist. So that's a lot. I'm pretty excited. And I think there's a huge opportunity here, but the bigger opportunity for the moment right now is to talk to Hawke. So Hawke's been very patient waiting, listening to that whole spiel. So Hawke, I'm going to start with you introducing yourself.
Okay. Hi there. I'm Hawke Robinson. I'm president and founder of RPG Research, a 501c3 nonprofit studying the effects of all role-playing game formats for their potential to help improve lives around the world. I was first involved with role-playing gaming in 1977, started researching their effects in 1983, also became a paid professional game master around that time. Started implementing role-playing games in educational settings around 1985 and in therapeutic settings around 2004. And that's also when we launched the RPG Research Project website in 2004, which is an online free repository of all available research we can find on the effects of role-playing games. And we are now, as of a few years ago, incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit. And 3-4 years ago, we had me, John was the first volunteer besides me in 2016 to join as somebody else that wasn't project related. I worked with a lot of organizations over the years, project by project by project, but when we started to incorporate, we decided to hang on to our volunteers. And John was the first regular one to be maintained. We now have around 150 volunteers across 6 continents, helping in many different capacities. I'm also a Washington State Department of Health registered recreational therapist with a background in computer science, neuroscience, research psychology, education, music, and other areas. And I'm also president and founder of RPG Therapeutics, which is my for-profit practice using music and games to help improve lives for various populations. We work with all the way from 2 years old through senior adults and everything in between.
Just a few things.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the short version. If you want to know more, go to hawkerobinson.com and you can see the list, because they have my tech background and my automotive background and outdoor and all this other stuff. So yeah, that's the gaming related.
So you mentioned RPG research and some of the stuff that you've been doing. What's the latest on RPG research today?
Well, last year, despite the whole COVID thing, was our best year yet. Each year since we incorporated, we've had triple-digit growth in a volunteer base, donations, the number of programs we're providing, and the number of people we serve. Last year, through all of our wonderful volunteers and through donations, we raised $17,000-$18,000. We spent about $10,000 on programs and such, research and programs. And that directly impacted the lives of at least 30,000 people last year. We were able to have some impact directly between our community programs, between hosting a bunch of conventions that would have been canceled, building the platform and such, doing the touring around the country, picking up the stuff for the museum, just a whole wide range of things. That's our biggest number ever, to do that for just 10 grand to help 30,000 people in a year. It was a whirlwind. This year we're trying to catch our breath. We need a lot more administrative volunteers. We have a lot of game masters and advocates and people like that. Now we really need to shore up and get some administrative staff, because John Welker, who's our vice president here, who's here, and Danielle and I are swamped on the administrative side. And what that does, it hinders my ability to finish writing the books and book chapters I've been asked to write. It hinders my ability to do new research, get material out. We just get drowned in administrative stuff, and then it kind of stops the research from growing, which is our primary purpose. Our community programs keep going, so that's good. But so we're bringing in lots of new administrative volunteers. That'll lighten the load for John, Danielle, and I, so we can get back to our core mission and vision and impact goals for RPG research. And then the other big thing, as you know from last year, is we had bequeathed unto RPG research the Paul Cardwell collection to help us launch the RPG Historical Museum. That will be at rpgmuseum.org. There's a placeholder site for that now. And it's over 1,000 pounds of boxes of stuff. And we have audio cassettes, we have VHS cassettes, we have all kinds of just different other books. This Cardwell did a whole America's Camping book. I didn't even know he was doing that. I'm normally an outdoorsy person too, so that was kind of interesting. So it's America's Camping book, called Paul Cardwell Jr., a comprehensive illustrated guide to camping.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of these. Pirates Base, a Myth World scenario. He had a whole Myth World RPG series that he was publishing over the years. So we've got a whole complete collection, multiple copies. Alarms and Excursions, like hundreds of releases of the Alarms and Excursions magazine and such, or zine. Of course, we have his, amazing collection. This is where it really ties in with the research. The whole murder, suicide, etc., attributed to role-playing games list. You can see this box here. This is just one of many. We've got 25 boxes.
Wow.
This type of material. We have unpublished manuscripts that he was working on. So this is one, America's Game book by Paul Cardwell Jr. It's a typewritten manuscript. Don't get it's too much light.
Yeah. Wow.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's on the backs of scrap paper. So it's interesting, the stuff like this is on the back of a Board of Education, a lot of his church paper.
Right.
So he did stuff on the back. So the paper is July 12th, 1963 that he started writing on the back of. So we're trying to figure out what, we have not even been able to go through it because there's so much. And the other problem, we're trying to raise $30,000 to get a warehouse, because right now this is all in my house. My whole downstairs, 1,750 square feet downstairs, is packed to the ceiling with all of our stuff. We had a small office we operated out of downtown, but it's owned by lawyers. And with COVID, they shut everything. They've always gone way above and beyond because they're lawyers. So zero operational space there. All of the community programs, schools, and libraries shut down, which is where we did a lot of our community programs and research. We have the bus and the trailer and all that, but storing them has been a problem. The neighbors always complain every time I park them in my yard. They don't like how they look, etc. The two RPG trailers and bus. Mm-hmm. So I put them in RV storage, and then they get vandalized and damaged. Whoa. So our biggest goal this year, we've got 7,000 raised so far. We did a fundraiser in December through Danielle arranging it with Mindcrack YouTube or Twitch stream, and we're going to be doing some more of those. We're trying to raise $30,000 either through donations or grants, any other way we can find it. because that'll cover the rent for a 2,000 to 4,000 square foot warehouse, which will let us move this stuff out of my house. And then we'll be able to have the experiential museum, right? First it'll be online, but then you'll be able to, when lockdowns are over, et cetera, be able to come in and experience all of these games and the history of role-playing game. You have different pathways you can take depending upon your interest. If you're just a layperson who's like, what's a role-playing game? Take this pathway. We'll figure out some storified, gamified way to do that. If you're a researcher who wants to delve in more deeply, take this pathway. If you're an educator who wants to know about the potential to use role-playing games, here's a different pathway. If you're a therapist who's heard about the power of role-playing games to help with social skills and anxiety and depression and a lot of other things, here's another pathway. And so we're working on that. And one of the goals is, as soon as we can, I've got a couple of scanners. We got to get some volunteers in here and start doing cataloging of what all is in these boxes. We don't even know, just the 25 boxes alone, 1,000 pounds worth of stuff. We don't really know all of it. We've kind of skimmed through it, but we want to do a really organized, careful cataloging. And then we'll scan all of that in, whatever can be scanned, digitize whatever can be digitized. We've set up a server, a catalog server called Collection Space. It's open source. It's used by libraries and museums all over the world. And we're getting it all ready. We're training. We have archivists now. They've been helping clean up our research archives, and we're consolidating from our 4 servers into 1. And all of it will eventually end up in the collection space where the museum and the research archives will all be there, but you just choose whichever pathway you want. And it will continue our goal to be the world's largest repository on, research and studies of role-playing games. Right now, we have over 10,000 content items in our repositories.
My gosh, it's just massive to even think about. How in terms of scope, okay, you get the site, right? So assuming the money, which of course is its own goal, let's sort of get the facility.
Right.
When do you think it will be open? What's the plan?
Yeah, as soon as we have the money, we don't even need to build it out. The moment I get the keys, I can drive because it has to have a 12-foot bay door. I can drive the bus and trailers straight in, and we can operate immediately out of the bus and trailers in the warehouse. It doesn't have to be built out. We just need a box of a warehouse, nothing fancy. So here's our criteria. It needs to be somewhere in the Spokane, Post Falls area, because it's where we operate. It needs to be along a bus route, because we're all about community connection, and a lot of our volunteers use the bus too. So it needs to be along a bus route. Where I live right now, I'm halfway up a plateau. There's no bus here. The nearest bus is a ways downhill, and there's no walk up here. There's a highway with no sidewalk. It is not fun. So we usually have to shuttle people up and down, and in the winter it's pretty rough. So somewhere in the greater Spokane area that we can afford, that has at least 2,000, 4,000 square feet, somewhere along a bus route. Has to have a 12-foot bay door so we can pull the trailers and bus in, and that we can, lock it down and secure it. And that's about the criteria. We're not being picky about this, right? That we have to have those things. Everything else is negotiable. And what we've seen is they're between 40 to 80 cents per square foot. So for that square footage, that works out to about $2,000 a month in rent. Then you get utilities, etc. So if we raise 30,000, we've got a year of all the rent is paid and utilities taken care of, and then we move as we need to. But we could operate immediately because the bus and trailers, we just drive them in and work straight out of them. And then we can build out office space, the museum space, all the community space. All of that can just immediately start happening after that. So as soon as we have that 30 grand, we can switch operations to there over a weekend.
That's great. And what are your plans to get that? Besides, obviously.
Yeah, so we have our Patreon, we have Facebook. So we've had our usual channels where we get a few thousand here and there. And then Danielle's working on some special monthly or every other month events with Mindcrack on Twitch. They're a very popular Twitch channel. They helped us raise in an 8-hour role-playing game marathon. They'd never done tabletop gaming before. They found out that it's cognitively much more challenging than electronic games. So for example, they would do 24 or 36-hour video game marathons as fundraisers, no problem. They were fried by 4 hours of tabletop role-playing gaming.
Oh,
And
come on.
they wanted to do 24 hours. We're like, let's go smaller.
I used to do 12 hours when I was I couldn't do it now, but I used to as a kid until 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
Because we developed our brains to handle it.
Right.
It is a very cognitively intense activity. And we
Totally
see
is.
it all the time because I work with brain injuries and autism spectrum and youth and all that. And it wears people out in a good way. It is brain exercise. A lot of the brain gets worked. And it was so fascinating to see that in play with this group, who they stream all the time. They do marathon gaming all the time. And 3-4 hours, which is what we recommend as the healthy amount, is 3-4 hours for game session.
Yeah.
You could see the cognitive decline after. John saw the whole thing. He was GMing as well in that. And that was just yet another interesting thing, because part of our research is by doing community stuff, we gather observational data, because there's in the lab and then there's in the wild, and where all of it comes back to the research and sharing it and go, hey, here's what was observed. And so now they're going to do, like, is it 4 hours, John, now that they're going to do with Danielle instead of trying to push 8 hours?
I think
once a month. 3 hours, good. That's exactly the right amount. And so about once a month or every other month, they'll do a special as a fundraiser. So we did this 8-hour marathon and they raised over $7,000 for us, which is almost $1,000 an hour.
Wow.
It was amazing for us. For them, it was actually pretty low. They have raised $30,000, $80,000 for other organizations. We're unheard of and we don't have a huge following. So that for us, it was amazing. $1,000 an hour. Hey, so we're just going to try to do more of that. We're not going to be on the road as much this year. We're not going to be doing as much of the fandom stuff. John's got the Spokon stuff coming up, but that's for Spokon. We're helping them with it. Spokon's a local sci-fi fantasy convention here. They raise funds to get books for the community. They're a nonprofit as well. John's the director chair of gaming. He's been with them for years. John, you talk about it.
Spokon.org, fantasy, science fiction, literary convention. I am the head of gaming. I've been the head of gaming for a while now. It's this year is going to be on Halloween.
Oh.
And because we've rescheduled it from the summer and the COVID stuff, and we didn't have anything last year.
Yeah.
This year it's Spokon revamped, and the theme will be vampires. We'll be running a huge epic game. In fact, I'm running a fundraiser on May 10th.
Explain how this D&D epic works, because it's different. It's a different way of doing gaming. Although Sam or somebody was just talking about how they were doing. I think it was Sam was talking about how he did a big one.
Yeah, an epic for in Dungeons and Dragons Adventures League terms, or in the old version, the RPG version, an epic is a multi-table event.
Yeah.
Where you have minimum of 6 tables with 6 dungeon masters of various levels. So you could have first level people at one table and 16th level people at the other table. And they're all working on the same story. It's all happening at the same time. They're just coming at it from different points of view, like a military attack. Somebody's coming from the sea, somebody's coming from the air. And we have, for every 2 tables, we have a captain who goes around and is a rules lawyer and the main villain for that section. And then we have the commander, who's me, who is organizing and controlling everything and tracking where everybody is. Events at one table will affect events at another table.
And there's a main map that people will be able to follow as they follow the progression, right?
Yep. And we're going to be broadcasting on 6 different channels, 2 on YouTube, 2 on Facebook, and 2 on Twitch simultaneously. So people can watch on all the things.
From here.
$5 a ticket if you're going to actually be playing. And
players will be remote.
/events.
Say that again.
RPGresearch.com/events.
Yeah, and we're also something we played with on and off that we're going to try to incorporate in this. Are you familiar with Face Rig?
It's funny because my son just brought it up today, actually, about.
So it does an
that software.
overlay and it moves with you. So like
Yes.
a dragon head that talks and moves and everything. So we've had that for over a year. Are you familiar with Zombie Orpheus Entertainment? You know, the gamers, Darkness Rising, all of that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so we have a very close relationship with Ben Dobbins, Zombie Orpheus, Dead Gentleman, and the Fantasy Network. You know, I built the platform, right? And so we have a really close relationship. So he was doing some broadcast workshops last year that I went to for free. And then I helped fix their studio up anyway, because their tech was a mess. So I fixed their computers, etc. And we just help each other out on everything. Great relationship there. So anyway, we've got a bunch of that kind of software that we still haven't implemented because the learning curve for our volunteers here, there's so much going on. You know, we're just trying to get them to be really good at the role-playing gaming alone with all that information, and trying to teach them how to do recording and lighting and sound and broadcasting and how Twitch works differently from YouTube, and all that has been an overwhelm. So we were broadcasting 6 to 12 sessions a week live between YouTube and Twitch, and things were starting to get broken and not dialed in, and just there was too much happening too fast for our volunteers to keep up. Some of them that had the training, you know, weren't available at the time. So we've actually suspended most of our live streaming, except for these events, till we have time to finish fixing up the resources here and train people back up so that we can, because the audio was going to crap and it had really deteriorated. So it's like, all right, just record everything. We'll worry about the streaming later. So we're still doing all of our programs and training. We're still recording it, but we're not live streaming right now while we kind of catch our breath after such a whirlwind. And then, yeah, the other thing is the workbook. I released the preview release in November with the 16 session thing. We found that sessions 15 and 16 were still too much information. People weren't retaining it. It was just too much. So we broke those up into 4 sessions. So now it's an 18 session book. And so each session's a 4-hour training session. You start out with a baseline knowledge test to see how much you already know before you even start. Then we do applied gaming on whatever the game is. Like for level 1 training, there's 7 different role-playing games you'll learn to play in GM. Then and we take breaks every hour. This is a 4-hour training segment. Then we do tips and tricks, and we do the lecture on all the quiz questions and explaining it in more depth. We'll bring out all sorts of accoutrement and you know, accessibility equipment and other things, all these little things that help make it a better game as a game master. Go back and do some more gaming, and then retake the quiz at the end to see how much you retained. And so that's a 4-hour training session, and we do any one volunteer does one of those a week, and then John and David and the rest of us run several of these a week for different groups who are trying to get the training. We're trying to get a whole bunch of level 1 trained game masters. The number one reason for all this is so we can do research with a controlled game master base, right? That they're all GMing as close to the same way as possible, because most of the research that's been done, that variable hasn't been controlled for at all. And you've got radically different game master styles out there and approaches. And there's enough confounds trying to do role-playing game research as it is, because it's such a multivariate, complex topic. So we're at least trying to get the game masters trained up so that when we do larger scale research, we do lots of smaller scale, but I want us to do larger scale longitudinal controlled studies as we get funding. And we will have all of this body of people trained to the same standards and the same documentation styles, et cetera, which will make it a lot easier to move the research forward. What I've been watching happen is the research just keeps spinning. People keep publishing new stuff. It's not new. And in fact, there's stuff right now coming out last 2, 3, 4, 5 years that's wrong. They're coming to conclusions that I came to back in the 80s as a teenager, went, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And then the evidence, the overwhelming observational evidence proved me wrong. I went, oh, well, that assumption was wrong. But
give me an example.
Right now, so the idea of assessment is a good thing, and doing play style assessments. Are you more of a murder hobo type? Are you more of a socializer type? Are you more of an explorer puzzle type? And so people are like, oh, check out the Bartle taxonomy. Well, the Bartle taxonomy is broken. It's a nice shorthand, but the empirical, it's been analyzed. It has a lot of broken parts, but it's a good starting point. Yi and Yang and the others have better tools, but they're all geared for video games.
Yeah.
Though you can extrapolate them into the tabletop world. So there's a recent trend. We've been seeing articles floating around, getting a lot of social media lift, saying, oh, well, if you know what your play style is, you should put them all together. Put all of the murder hobos together so they don't ruin the fun for the socializers. Put the socializers together so they can all game together, etc. And it makes it a lot easier for the GM, and everybody's happy, right? Right? You got the play styles together. That can work in the short term, but A, in the long term with campaigns, there's a consequence, and B, it has a huge social consequence. And I think C, it's reflective of where our society's at now, which, so what my research showed is, no, don't do that. That's a bad thing, and it hurts the benefits of role-playing gaming. We have run games, right, and worked with others who have run games with prisons and gangbangers and people from rival gangs playing at the same table together. You want to talk about differences, at different, ethnic backgrounds, etc., and they're able to play together. So if they can overcome that, I think you can overcome your play style differences enough. And what I found is, for a short-term campaign, yes, it makes it easier for the facilitator because you only have to appeal to one play style. You don't have to try to juggle it between everybody's different preferences. So it's kind of a lazy way out. And that the satisfaction scores of the players will be higher initially. They're like, oh, it was so great. I finally got to play the way I wanted to play. And this munchkin didn't derail it, and, et cetera, et cetera. So for a one shot where you know what your play styles are, you'll get that initial higher score from the participants. It doesn't hold up with a campaign. With the campaign, what happens is you're in an echo chamber of the same play style. And the group, as it progresses, ends up getting in ruts because they don't have creative differences to take them into new ways of solving problems. They all think the same way, or they all play the same way. And so eventually they'll start to get higher level, and they'll kind of get bored with it. They're like, oh, let's start over. It's just the way the campaign went. Let's just start over again. Let's do it again. And they start over. But anyway, the participant enjoyment scores go down, 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 down over time. You start higher than the mixed group, the diverse group,
right?
But you go downhill quickly. And there's more reports of boredom, et cetera, for a long-term campaign. And again, not even getting into the social consequences of teaching people to do this kind of balkanization by fiat is what I've been calling it. It has really bad consequences long-term. But if you take a group that's diverse and you as a GM do the extra work of trying to make sure that all the diverse play styles get met in every session, and that everybody's complementary strengths and weaknesses, that they have to find a way to work together, right? That's one of the beauties of role-playing games, is that we, from very different backgrounds and interests, all come together and work together, rather than, oh, let's just only, let's not play with others. Let's just play with more of ourselves. Those groups, yeah, there might be a little bit more tension at first. This gets into whole Tuckman's thing about forming, storming, norming, performing, and group formation and dynamics, which we talk about in our training. So the participation scores in that first session would, on average, are lower. On a score of 1 through 10, 5 being an average game, and we're perfectly happy with 5s. 10s are really exceptional games. You would see more 3.5, 4.5 scores with the mixed group, and more 6s and 7s and 8s with the siloed groups for that first game. But over time, it inverts. And you watch the diverse group keep climbing and climbing, their enjoyment scores keep going up because of that diversity. And so there's a great example of this in the movie, The Gamers, Darkness Rising, where if you remember it at all, they're a group of munchkin murder hobo rules lawyers, right? They're terrible, and they have a reputation. and nobody else wants to play with them because they make a 12-year-old cry and things like that. All of these things come out of the movie, how terrible they are. And he's trying to get new players, and nobody will. Finally, he gets an ex-girlfriend, one of the players, to come play. She's never played before. She's like, oh, how hard can it be? I'll give it a shot. And she kind of does her own thing. She doesn't let the others tell her how to make a character and all that. He loans her the player's handbook. This is 3rd edition. This is the first time that Zombie Overseas Entertainment, Dead Gentlemen, had endorsement. They were allowed by Wizards of the Coast to show it. It wasn't covered in cardboard. And actually, they filmed at the offices at one point doing the pirate ninja scene. And so he hands her the product placement player's handbook, 3rd edition, and like, it's got all the rules that you need to look. So she makes a character on her own. And she makes this fighter that's a 12 strength and 9 constitution and 9th level fighter with only 45 hit points, but a 17 charisma because she'll negotiate her way out of fights. And the other players are just horrified at what she said. Like, no, a fighter should have this strength and hit points and constitution, and this is how a fighter should be. And she's just completely upending it. Instead, she did a more finesse, intelligent, charismatic approach rather than the usual tank approach. And they're like, oh, you're going to die. When you die, you're going to play Bikini Babe, because they made one for her that was in chainmail bikini, etc., with a broadsword, etc. These were intentionally bad puns in there. So they go through the adventure, and they're struggling as a group. Again, forming, storming. They're storming all the time. They never get into norming and performing as a group. And that's why this group just keeps struggling. You see this happen out there in the real world a lot. But eventually, her style of play infects the group, and the group starts having new experiences. And they've already tried this campaign twice before and died. And this time around, with her being added to the mix and changing their way of doing things, they do much better. And at the end, with the exception of one player who has a complete breakdown, just blows up and yells and leaves, all the other players are like, wow, I really like the way you role play. I'd never thought of playing like this. So the movie illustrates beautifully how bringing in that diversity and such of play styles is so critical to having a better game experience. And so I learned that lesson in the 80s as a teenager, because I tried the siloed thing, and initially it was easier. I was paid to run groups. I had 3 paid groups, 2 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday, as a teenager game master, and I had my own groups as well during the week. And so I tried that because it was getting really challenging trying to address everybody's different, like, well, I wanted more combat. Well, I wanted more socializing. Well, I wanted more puzzles. Well, I wanted more dungeon crawl. Well, I wanted more loot. Well, I was like, I can't please all of you at once, right? That was the frustration as a teenager. It was like, so I had to make modules that would make sure I thought of all those things. And it was a lot more work than, well, these guys all love a dungeon crawl. I'm just going to throw a dungeon crawl at them. That's a piece of cake, right? No problem there. And so I did that. And again, it started out, this is so much easier. They were happy. I was happy. And all of those groups, it was very difficult keeping their level of interest up pretty quickly. Within a few sessions, it started to show up. And I didn't know what was happening, right? A lot of this stuff is hindsight analysis of like, well, what was going on here and here? And through that evaluation and such, figuring out what happened. So now I hear this all happening again, where people are like, no, you should silo. And it's a mirror of what's happening all through our society right now, rather than the whole melting pot approach. Everybody's getting more and more separated, and it does so much harm. And so I use balkanization by fiat. I know balkanization is another hot word you're not supposed to use anymore. But it's the by fiat part where you're separating people off into groups that you think should be together, rather than just letting things naturally flow and happen, and doing the melting pot and mix and trying to find a way to get along. And that has real ramifications for the gaming industry, and for us socially, and for just having a good game.
One of the
that's why
that's great, and you've answered one of my other questions I was going to ask. But David knows I recently reviewed John Peterson's The Elusive Shift, and one of the things John talks about in detail is exactly what you mentioned, Hawke, which was the personality assessments. And he goes all the way back in Alarms and Excursions, and basically shows that they had sort of invented this. And then every generation, right there, right? Every 10 years, new gamers come in and go, you know what? And then they come up with the same thing without probably and I think where the piece that's missing here is the conclusion you came to. And one of the things I was going to ask was like, you know, what's one of the conclusions you've come to, a piece of advice you would give? But I think you said it, which is, it's great that we can identify. And this is sort of how I feel about Myers-Briggs, right? It's sort of like this, well, everybody, you sit over here and you do this, and that's your problem is this. And by the end of it, everybody's got a very nice label. And then either we abuse the labels or we don't use them in a way that helps create unity. We actually use them to separate people out. And like you said, we've got these sort of divisions that may have been there naturally, and we overcome them through dialogue and community and gaming and good experience, or you end up with the reverse, right? And it's interesting because I have that now. So one of the things I've started doing is I've come to the conclusion for adult world that super long campaigns, I call it the game that never ends, right? You're like, I want to play D&D. How long does it last? 3 to 5 years. Hope you stick around, is just a hard sell for a lot of folks. So what I've been doing is saying, I will write an adventure. That adventure, when it concludes, we will stop and go, does anybody want to leave? Does anybody want to come in? And we basically make it flexible for that. But what that also means is no one play style stays the same and no one play style dominates for long, even if there is. And it's been because I've had different groups with some people carried over and newcomers, really, I think, healthy for both me as a play style playing with other players and also the group to have that different experience. But it is interesting because I think what happens is you get one of two things, as you said, quick churn, right? So that's your convention scenario. That's people who there's just a lot of jumping between group to group. And then you have folks who've been playing together for 20, 30 years, right? And so then that's where you get the like, whatever, I want you to do what we got, which is this. And of course, what gets lost, as you mentioned, is all these things that were sorted out over time to make the experience really, it may have not been great that first, 3 to 5 sessions. I remember telling one of my players, he said, the introduction was rough. Like they basically hazed the character. And I said, when you save each other's butts, it's going to be a different conversation. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Because of course it's a shared experience and in some ways a shared fictional threat. So anyway, that's a sort of a tangent. But I think one of the things I was going to ask was what, if you were to say, based on what you're seeing, so, look, pandemic, tabletop role play, this Zoom being one example, but one of many of sort of digital play and digital community. I think an appreciation for in-person play, even if you can't do it, and certainly an appreciation for sort of the creativity that we need to use our imaginations when we're boxed into these rooms where we can't otherwise. With that confluence of events, what do you see sort of the role of gaming taking now and in the future?
Last year was our biggest year ever. People are craving this human connection. Mm-hmm. And this interface here, we always feel there's something lacking compared to being physically in the same space. Everybody, young and old, feels the difference. Even introverts and such, and people who really don't like to be around other people, there's still a little bit of that humanity lost, and that's why often this is not comfortable for people. It just feels weird. Our brains aren't wired for this two-dimensional thing. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens in this process, and so people come out of this always feeling a little unsatisfied. Like, well, at least it was good to see grandma and the kids and all. At least we got to see them, right? It was better than nothing. But it always feels lacking compared to being there and being able to do the hugs and all that stuff. They're just that human interaction. The role-playing gaming, though, puts us into a deeper, shared collective majesty of this collective vision. It puts us into a shared space. So if you look at the artwork that I have on the bus, and the trailers and all of that, I commissioned through Fiverr a bunch of different artists because I wanted really different styles of the same thing. So I had a long description of, you've got a variety of different people around the table, and it's a game table, and over them is a bubble cloud, whatever, of what they're imagining, of their characters and of a scene happening. And I left that kind of open-ended of what it was, but it needed to be gaming related. And so on all these vehicles, you see these people around a table with dice and miniatures, and then over them are all these different scenes of that, and it's a collective bubble. You've got 6 different people around the table, but it's a shared scene. And that experience, when you get that flow state, when you get the group in norming and performing phase, when it does come together, the barrier here starts to drop away. You start having that collective shared experience. But one of the main things we're finding is there's a balance. I'm a technologist, right? I love tech. I've got a computer science background. I do tech all the time. I'm always looking for ways that tech can make our lives better. But I have done so many studies. Back in 2010, 2012, John's heard this 1,000 times. I brought in more than a dozen different groups, 120 different players over a couple-year period to try to just optimize the role-playing game experience. So I would turn the room temperature up and crank it down. I would mess with the lighting. I would mess with ambient noise and loud noise, everything I could think of as a variable to make uncomfortable and comfortable, one at a time, different variables with all these different groups. And then I also messed around with different game systems. I was doing a lot of variables here, but trends started to become very clear. And, none of them are really like strikingly surprising as far as, well, it seems that 3 to 4 hours is kind of the sweet spot per session if you're gaming once per week. You should probably keep it around 4 or 5 players per GM, right? We've all learned that intuitively, that because you get more people, it slows the game down, et cetera, et cetera. I've run tables with 20 people and I've done it effectively, but the gameplay style has to change, and it changes the experience quite a bit. 4 to 5 is the sweet spot to get the optimal experience. The frequency, if it's too far apart, you forget stuff and it takes longer to refresh. You need longer sessions. But if you're every other day, you could do 1 hour sessions. It works okay. The story flow keeps going. So all that experimentation. And there was one key part I could not get the variable to go the way I wanted it to, is with bringing in visual technologies with screens or projectors. We were talking about that just before we started doing this. Mm-hmm. I've used projectors on the table. I've used flat screens in the table. Everybody's had computers, no computer. I've tried all these different things. And what I kept finding is when you add a screen to a tabletop game, so again, using a participation enjoyment scores of 1 through 10, 5 being a good average. Everybody had a good time. That was a good game. Just not exceptional, but good. So if you're getting 5s, that's your good middle of the road. Things are going well. You're doing a good game. You start getting 4s, something's a little off. You start getting above 5s. You're going, hey, this is an exceptional game. And I started seeing a direct, strong correlation between the screen involvement and reduction in participation enjoyment scores. And it didn't matter if it was someone over here texting on the table every now and then or whatever, or it kept going off, or, we had, John, were you there at the convention at Tulkamut where that one girl had her laptop up because she had a fidget spinner and a laptop and was playing a video game while we were playing the tabletop convention game? Were you there for that, John? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was that. And it was just bad for everybody around.
It was horrible. I was just like, it was so rude. So, I mean, these are extreme ends, right?
Yeah. People
just using it only for the rules. I only use the tablet for the player's handbook. I don't use it for anything else, right? These all seem, I've tried every variation of this. Any screen at the table, just one screen, will lower the average score 0.25 to 3 points, depending upon how much the screen is there. One device that's being used correctly, 0.25, half a point. But it's consistently a lower score, again, in the aggregate. You'll have up and down games, but you aggregate all this data. And when you have more screens, and again, projections, it's so cool to have a projected scene from overhead, right? It's very cool. The wow factor's there. The flat screen in the table, it's a great wow factor. This type of visual technology, though, something happens with our brains. It takes us out of that collective imagination bubble. Mm-hmm. When we look at that screen, we leave this collective vision thing. And so there's something, and I can't find any neuroscience that explains it to me, what's happening to that creative bubble. but it breaks the creative bubble when you have to look at a screen like this.
Wow.
And it's not impossible to overcome. You can do it. And one of the ways we found with this, when we're using this kind of format with video conferencing, is minimize the tech. You have to do the screen. You got to have the webcam. You got to have the microphone. You got to have the speakers. You got to have the lighting. You need good lighting, and you got to have the screen. But keep it to the minimum. Virtual tabletop tools, VTTs. They're awesome for watching. If you're going to watch a streaming show, please use VTTs if it's for entertainment, right? You're entertaining an audience. VTTs really add to that experience for an audience. But when it comes to the players, there's a wow factor. But on the average, the technical glitches and hassles that it creates lower the overall experience. Now, you will have VTT sessions where everything goes smoothly. But that's pretty rare when you add all of this together. And bringing VTTs to an in-person game, yes, John? You got to go? Okay. Is there anything you want to throw in, John, before you go?
No. I wish I could stay longer, but speaking of VTTs, I have to get into one now for my regular Thursday group.
All right, have fun. So anyway, again, consistently overall in the aggregate, people are like, wow, that was cool. I really liked it. But when you look at their participation enjoyment scores, they're lower. Plus, I have another layer of analyzing this that I've been developing over the years, which is the observed immersion scale. Because you got subjective reports, but I've been learning to correlate subjective reports to body language and interaction that I'm observing in the group, and training our GMs to get better and better and better at this. This gives us a more objective means, and you can view it on video, right? Recordings, as long as you can see them. You got to have the visual part and the auditory. You got to have both, because it's multi. And being in person makes you can pick up even more subtleties, obviously. But that OIS, I've gotten better and better at predicting what the participant scores will be. I can both at a group level and individual level go, I think that's going to be about a 6. I think that player is going to be a 3. And I get really close correlations, 0.8 and better, right? 0.8's the gold standard for finding those correlations. And it's getting better and better. I'm trying to crank it up to 0.9, and I'm still working on that.
It's interesting because I found and we're going to have to wrap up. We're just about time.
Yeah.
One of the things that detracts tremendously is a person who's there, who's not playing.
Sure.
A person who's in the room.
Don't
worry.
Depends. Yeah,
I'm just going to be there. And it's different if the person's doing something else completely. But what we've had a lot of times is players who don't want to play, but they want to be sort of there at the table. Or we've had people who just want to listen or whatever they want to do. And it's always been a fascinating distraction, because
so what we have found,
lose that everybody together.
Right. We're running a whole bunch of community programs every week, right? With all sorts of age groups and backgrounds. We've done it with the VTTs, all of that. And everybody's like, wow, that's really cool. Ultimately, we keep coming back to, let's use a whiteboard, another webcam with a battle mat, get back to basics, get as analog as you can get in this digital environment. Participation scores are much closer to the in-person experience consistently.
That's awesome.
Again, for recreational play or therapeutic play or educational play. Entertainment is a completely different approach. For entertainment, VTTs are the way to go. They make it more like a movie experience for people, and so it's more accessible to a wider audience.
Right. That's excellent. Well, so we've hit on quite a bit, and I really appreciate your expertise. I mean, we could easily talk for hours, and we just to also keep this bite-sized, I think we would love to have you back, particularly to talk about sort of the future of how the digitization is going, the progress in the RPG museum is going. What social should you leave us with that we can make sure everybody gets at the end?
Please, if you can donate to the museum so we can get that warehouse.
And where's that? Where do we donate?
Go to rpgresearch.com/donate. Okay. And you can donate by PayPal, one-time donation, recurring donation. You can join our Patreon if you want early access to videos and essays and blog postings before the public. We've got a GoFundMe, gofundme.com/RPG museum. There's also one for the RPG trailer that's been not very active, but it's there if you want to help support our trailer repairs and stuff like that. Now I need to be clear because it gets muddled. RPG Research is a nonprofit. It's separate from me. It's 501c3 incorporated. RPG LLC and RPG Therapeutics is for profit, and that's, you know, my organization. And then I have all my stuff, right? And the bus and the trailers, all that are owned by me. And I let RPG Research use all this stuff for free so that RPG Research's overhead is much less. We're trying to get RPG Research to be as independent as possible. We finally bought a computer, this broadcast computer, for RPG Research. Instead of using mine, they have their own. So when we move to the warehouse, it will have its own. So we're trying to raise 30,000. We've got 7,000 saved, so we need at least 23,000, and then we can move into the warehouse. Until then, I'm trying to get a way, trying to figure out how to set up so we can have an assembly line of the museum stuff to scan in. But again, we're packed full here. And so I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to do this before the museum, because I don't want to wait 6 months or whatever to get this stuff scanned in. There's a lot of people asking for stuff, and I'm like, I don't know where it is yet. We've got volunteers we're training. We're trying to get the hardware and the software set up for the scanning, but I still think we're a month or two out from resuming. We were starting to set up for it. COVID, you know, kind of put the kibosh on that because the volunteers, one of the volunteers caught it and was like, stayed away after that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so we need volunteers to help with that, or that can physically be here, because that's a physical process to scan it all in. And we need the donations, because the sooner we get
to
the
the volunteers sign up?
rpgresearch.com/volunteer or /jobs to see the list of different things. And you can email info@rpgresearch.com for anything you want. And we're on Twitter at RPG Research and Facebook at RPG Research and YouTube at RPG Research. Just put RPG Research after it and you'll find us.
Excellent. And a lot of this, not all of it, but a lot of it was also in the annual report. So we'll refer to that as well, because it was in your letter. Excellent. David, is there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I am excited by the projects you're working on, as always, and I can't wait to hear more. And I would love to put updates in the newsletter. You know, even a snippet of, you know,
PBS. I did the PBS webinar yesterday. Went really well, so that's really exciting. We have one more on March 17th that we're this is on the LLC side, but contracted to train more than 100 of PBS's staff on role-playing games, recreation therapy, accessibility, and the brain computer interface project's coming along too, right? Playing role-playing games with your brain. You guys know about that project?
No.
Oh, God.
About dreams, but not that.
We have a whole Saturday. We have a whole software development division. This is $2,400, by the way. This is from OpenBCI. It's an R&D kit. So I've been doing EEG and BCI stuff for years and years, because I want people with locked-in syndrome and complete locked-in syndrome to be able to get out of their cages of their bodies. These are people who are paralyzed and can't interact, etc. Anyway, so on Saturdays, we have a group of developers. We have an open source project. It's bcirpg.com. And we're developing an electronic role-playing game that's online, multiplayer, turn-based, and can be played with just your brain.
Wow.
So we did the initial prototyping using Neverwinter Nights to kind of train the developers, because a lot of them were in school or coming out of school in computer science degrees. And now we're doing a lot of scoping and flow charting, trying to figure out how to make this work when all you have are the signals from this, to have initially just text-based, menu-driven way to play the game in a turn-based way. We had to figure out, we didn't want to use a voting system because that's tyranny of the majority. We couldn't do real time because there's too much latency with BCI. And so we had to figure out a way. So we came up with an opt-out approach. You can stay in for the commit, and then you can break out into discussions. And it's a whole other way of trying to resolve conflict in the group on making a decision. And so we've been working all of that out. So anyway, it's coming along. We're in phase 2 now of this project. We're a year and a half into it, and more on that on bcirpg.com. So it's just
excellent. And I'd love no, David's right. We need to hear from you monthly. So we're just going to come after you now. You have so much stuff to say. I think you need to tell us the membership
just
about
bullet point thought. Just
bullet
points.
It's not a lot. Just give
I'll
us
add
hard.
Yeah, that's hard. This book is my bullet point.
I have it. Yeah.
Well, so the new one I'm uploading tonight, the revised version.
Super.
So it's been cleaned up and improved in 18 sessions instead of 16.
Well, I appreciate all your time and everything you do, Hawke. You're just amazing. I don't even know where you find the energy. Also the resources and you know, you're just brilliant and there's so many things going on at once. I don't know how you keep track of all of them. I think the CAR-PGA in its own small way, hopefully can at least get the word out at the minimum, if not directly contribute. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for continuing Paul's legacy, by the way, which
Yeah,
that's a heartfelt thank you. There was
glad
no,
I
we just
can.
weren't positioned, right? So you were the
Yeah.
best. And I think it's fantastic that you've taken it up. So thank you for that too. You know, formally for everybody to hear when they hear this recording, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that was not because you drove down there, right? So that was
Yeah,
not
yeah, to Texas
insignificant.
from Washington. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
really appreciate you doing all that. And I think with that, we will.